Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This Shabbos is a very special Shabbos. The Shabbos of the upcoming, blessed of the upcoming week. God willing, we'll have some of the hostages home, and God willing, Israel will continue to do what it needs to do to protect the Jewish people and the land of Israel while bringing their loved ones home to their families. And it's a parsha in which deals with anti-Semitism. It's a common theme in which we have seen over the last the year and a half especially, but it's a common theme for the Jewish people for thousands of years, and it shows, it rears its ugly face again in this week's parsha. But the answer to anti-Semitism is also in this week's parsha, and that is the opening of this week's parsha. Right away, it talks about the Shemot. These are the names of, the Jewish people that came to Mitzrayim. Talks about the brothers, and then V'yakam melech chadash, a new parah comes along that didn't remember Joseph. And so there's two opinions about this new pharaoh that came along. It doesn't remember Joseph, and that is one opinion. It happened to be a new pharaoh, just going by the name of Pharaoh, as all of the kings of Egypt had the name Pharaoh. Another opinion is it was the same pharaoh, but he turned his back on Joseph, the viceroy of Egypt, the great economist that saved the entire Egypt from all of its tragedy, from all of its famine, from entire destruction, from economic destruction. And it teaches something very powerful. What happens is, a lot of times we think that we're here to appease people. When we appease people, that is going to change the way they like the Jews or change the way that they dislike the Jews if we're going to appease them. There's a very famous story about Haman. Haman comes to the greatest anti-Semite in the biblical times. Haman comes to Achashverosh and says, Achashverosh, these Jewish people, they're causing you such they're not adding anything to the economy. There's so many of them and they're not adding anything. I'm going to give you 10,000 rubles, 10,000 silver coins, in order to offset what they're not bringing in. What does Achashverosh respond? Keep your money, let's get rid of them. And so it was never about the money. It was never an issue about that they were draining the economy. But there was ultimately an inherent hate that happens that is from anti-Semitism. And so Paro forgets about what Joseph does for the Egyptians. He doesn't care what Joseph did, what Joseph added. He saved the entire Egypt. But what we do see in this big parsha is that what happens is that we see that the Jewish people, they remember Joseph. They be fruitful and multiplied. They had children. They did not care about the oppression that the Egyptians put on them. The more they oppressed them, the more of children they had, the more identity they kept. And they kept their Jewish identity. They always remained Jewish, even under all this oppression. And because of that is the reason why they were redeemed. Is because of that, while Paro, the Egyptians, didn't like the Jews, ultimately, that is why the Jewish people ultimately became successful. It's not because they tried to assimilate into the Egyptian economy. It's not because they tried to assimilate into the Egyptian structure, like the Egyptians even try to force them to, as they try to make the girls kill all the boys and make the girls live like Egyptians. But instead, they remain steadfast to their Jewish identity, to their names, to their language, to their clothing. They remain Jews. And it's a very powerful idea as we live in this world today. We live in a world where we have anti-Semitism, no question about it, but not in an oppressive way like the Jews in Egypt, or like the Jews in the former Soviet Union, or like the Jews living in Germany. But one of the things that we can learn from history is that the Jewish people, at their way that they remain strong, is by staying to our identity, being different. That's assimilating into society is not how the Jews of Germany survived. Is just the opposite. The Jews of Germany have believed the way that they could change the hatred of the world against the Jews of anti-Semitism would be assimilating and becoming part of the Egyptian society, or like the French Jews, the French Ashkenazic Jews, which almost no longer exist. But when Jewish people keep their identity, that is how we are successful. That is how we are strong. That is how we continue to have our identity and continue throughout thousands of years. And so, when the parsha opens up and says that these are the generations of the Jewish people, they continued after the story of Joseph. They didn't disappear like Joseph. They didn't disappear after Joseph died. Even though Paro changed, they didn't disappear. They always remained Jewish, and they always remained their identity strong. They didn't become assimilated and lost in the assimilation of the world, which is the greatest tragedy of the Jewish people today. And so today we have our biggest fight against anti-Semitism. We have a great army that fights for us physically in the land of Israel. But in the rest of the world, where we have terrible anti-Semitism, and it rears its ugly head, the way to fight it is not by disappearing. The way to fight it is by standing strong, by being Jewish, by celebrating our Judaism, and God willing, will bring a time which will have peace and security for all Jewish people around the world. Shabbat Shalom, and very soon we'll have the great Exodus, the time of the coming of Mashiach, very soon in our days. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.